When Skybound announced Invincible VS back at the Xbox Summer Showcase in June 2025, my first reaction was skepticism. The Invincible franchise is amazing, but the history of games based on comics and animated series is full of disappointments. So my first question was, who is making this game? And that's where things got interesting. The studio behind the project is Quarter Up, formed by ex-developers from Double Helix, the same guys who created the 2013 Killer Instinct. That completely changes the weight of the conversation. We're not talking about just any studio trying to cash in on a popular license for an easy buck. We're talking about people who have actually delivered a real competitive fighting game with genuine combat system depth. That gives you confidence right out of the gate. What caught my attention in the promotional material was executive producer Mike Willette's declared ambition to make a tournament-quality game, not a disposable product. They are aiming at a space that was left empty after Dragon Ball FighterZ dominated the 3v3 scene and eventually cooled off over time. The proposal of mixing the tag system in the style of Marvel versus Capcom with the combo depth of Killer Instinct, all with the brutal DNA of the Invincible series, looks like an absurdly good combination on paper. Then came the closed beta in November 2025, and that's where things jumped off the page. Playing that initial build, you could feel that the fighting system had real weight. The characters moved with that sense of impact that license-based fighting games rarely get right. Invincible himself had that almost full-screen dash punch that was exactly what you'd expect from the character if you watched the show. It wasn't perfect, there were stutters, and the netcode needed adjusting, but the mechanical foundation was there, solid. One of the most curious points of following the development was seeing how they dealt with the franchise's brutality. Invincible is famous for its absurdly violent clashes, and the game delivers that with graphic overkills that would make the Mortal Kombat crowd blink. The smart detail was including a content creator mode that disables these more extreme deaths, which shows they thought about the game's reach beyond a hardcore bubble. This kind of detail reveals a team that really thinks about the product as a whole. April's open beta confirmed a solid development pace. Having 10 playable characters and 6 arenas working with ranked matches just weeks before the April 30th launch says a lot about the health of the project. They even revealed post-launch content plans with a year one season pass, which indicates that Skybound is betting on a long life for this game, not just a launch and abandon. This is exactly what a fighting game needs to sustain itself in the competitive community. The development context of Invincible VS leaves me genuinely excited, and mind you, I'm a hard person to impress with licensed games. The combination of a studio with a real track record in fighting games, an IP that has plenty of brutality and charismatic characters, and a design philosophy that respects both the casual and competitive player creates a much more solid foundation than most similar projects. The weight is on their shoulders now, and with the launch on April 30th, 2026, the moment of truth is arriving. Let me be honest with you, when a fighting game announces it has a story mode, my automatic reaction is to be suspicious. Most games in the genre treat the story mode as an obligation, something to justify the price tag and not much else. So when Quarter Up started talking about Invincible VS's story mode, my guard was way up. What changed my perspective was finding out who is writing this story mode. The script is penned by Mike Rogers, Quarter Up's narrative director, alongside Helen Lay, who is a writer and co-executive producer of the animated series, all with Robert Kirkman overseeing the process. This is the equivalent of hiring the original chef to cook a special dish. You might have doubts, but at least you know the recipe will taste right. The detail that impressed me the most was their statement that the story is original, not a direct adaptation of the comics or the show. They confirmed that it likely takes place during the animated series' 3rd season, which nicely contextualizes the game's roster. But instead of retelling what has already happened, they are creating a new arc within this universe. This is exactly what I wanted to hear, because nobody needs yet another game retelling Invincible's origin from scratch. What became clear in the interviews is that they are chasing what makes the Invincible franchise unique. the emotional and psychological consequences of the conflicts. The series was never just about who hits the hardest. It's about the cost of being a hero, the complicated relationships, the impossible choices. Rogers confirmed that the narrative will explore these denser themes, and considering Helen Lay already made this work in the animated series, the creative foundation is solid. The comparison they made to the Invincible Adam Eve special is very well chosen. That special managed to tell a complete and emotionally satisfying story in about an hour, without needing dozens of episodes to work. VS's story mode aims for the same format, designed to be completed in the runtime of an episode of the show. That's smart because it respects the player's time and doesn't try to artificially stretch out content that would work better lean and direct. The question of canon was purposely left open by Rogers in the interviews. He was extremely evasive when asked if the story is considered official within the universe, which could be either a marketing ploy to preserve surprises or an indication that they themselves haven't defined that status yet. What reassures me is that every playable character will have an active role in the narrative, so it won't be the kind of story where half the roster shows up just as contextless fighters. The point that will define whether this story really works or not is the balance between accessibility and depth. They promise something that doesn't require prior knowledge for newcomers to the franchise, but that is still rewarding for those who follow the comics and the show. This is the project's biggest narrative challenge. We didn't have access to the story mode in the beta, so everything is still promises and intentions. But with Kirkman supervising and the show's co-producer holding the pen, this promise has more credibility than most licensed games I've followed. When you get your hands on Invincible VS for the first time, the thing that hits you right away isn't the violence, isn't the visuals, it's the weight. Every strike has a sense of impact that most license-based fighting games simply fail to deliver. It's clear from the very first few minutes that whoever built the combat system spent years thinking about real fighting games, not just how to use the Invincible license in the most commercial way possible. The 3 versus 3 system with active tagging is the heart of everything here, and Quarter Up made a very smart choice in approaching it differently from Dragon Ball FighterZ or Marvel vs. Capcom. They implemented a combo meter that limits the length of individual hit strings, which means you won't get stuck watching an endless sequence of blows without being able to react. But when you swap characters mid-combo, this meter partially resets, creating a real incentive for you to use your team strategically instead of just spamming your favorite character. What surprised me playing the alpha and later confirming in the beta was the depth of the defensive system. The assist breaker, which works like a burst to escape combos, requires 2 bars of meter and has a manual timing that really reminded me of Killer Instinct's counterbreaker system. It's not a free option, which means the attacker has to think about when to apply pressure, knowing the opponent might have this resource saved up. This creates a constant tension that simpler fighting games never manage to achieve. The game's mobility is another point that took me a while to fully absorb. You have the normal dash, the air dash, and the EX dash, each consuming different resources and serving distinct purposes within combat. The EX dash is especially powerful for creating mix-ups and offensive pressure, but it eats up meter that you'd also need for the assist breaker or the push block. This constant resource management is what separates a player who just mashes buttons from one who truly understands the game. Accessibility was clearly a priority for the team, and they hit the right dose. The auto combo system practically teaches you how the structure of normal, special, super, and tagged works, without you needing to read a 40-page manual. The damage is scaled down when using auto combos, which is perfect because it encourages the player to learn the manual routes without forcing aggressive learning right away. I played with people who had never touched a fighting game, and they were pulling off satisfying combos in under half an hour. A point that still leaves me with a question mark is the link timing between normals. At certain points in the beta, connecting a normal attack to another normal had a window that felt inconsistent, sometimes too generous, sometimes demanding without warning. It's not a game-breaking issue, but it's the kind of thing that will bother more technical players coming from games with millimeter-precise timing like Street Fighter 6 or Tekken 8. They have until the launch on April 30th to polish this. At the end of the day, Invincible VS's gameplay is the most solid part of everything shown so far. The design philosophy of making you feel like a real superhero in combat is working in practice. And the tag system has enough depth to sustain a serious competitive community. With 18 characters at launch and the first DLCs already confirmed with Universa and Immortal, the game will have material to evolve for a long time. What needs to happen now is for the LaunchNet code to be consistent, because a game with mechanics so heavily based on timing dies fast if the online connection is poor. Let me start by being direct. The graphics aren't going to win any visual technology awards in 2026. But that's a completely wrong way to evaluate what Quarter Up is doing with this game's art. The issue was never about polygon counts or texture resolution. It was about aesthetic fidelity. And in that department, the conversation is much more interesting than it seems on the surface. The biggest visual challenge any game based on the Invincible series faces is the purposeful simplicity of the character designs. Kirkman's comics had a clean, almost minimalist style where colorful uniforms and simple shapes carry the entire visual identity. Translating that to 3D without looking generic or empty is a very fine line to walk. And what I saw in the beta was a team that clearly studied this problem carefully. The result is a stylized 3D with a slight comic book effect on the edges of the characters that works well in motion. What impressed me the most visually were the stages. When you're in the middle of a match, it's easy to ignore the background, but looking closely, you can see the level of detail put into each arena. Outer space with floating debris, the ruined city with structures collapsing in real time during the fight. These environments have a scale that communicates the weight of the show's battles. Some stages had fewer animated elements than others in the beta, but the artistic composition was consistently above what I expected from a title of this scale. The ultimate finishers and overkill animations are where the visuals really pop. They solved the problem of creating impactful cinematic moments using a combination of dynamic camera work, screen distortion, and particle effects that directly evoke the most brutal moments of the animated series. It's exactly the kind of exaggerated violence that the franchise celebrates, executed in a way that looks straight out of the show. The criticism some people had about the long duration of these supers is valid, but visually they are the highlight of the presentation. The most recurring criticism I saw in the community about the visuals is regarding the animations. In certain stances and transitions between movements, the characters have a stiffness that contrasts with the fluidity of the special attacks. It's as if the game has two registers of animation quality, one for combos and supers, where everything flows very well, and another for neutral states and locomotion, which still need polish. This is the kind of thing that can improve considerably between the beta and the launch on April 30th, but I'd keep an eye on it. Overall, Invincible VS's visuals are honest about what the project sets out to be. It's not a game trying to compete with Mortal Kombat 1 in photorealism, nor should it be. It's a stylized adaptation of an IP with a very specific visual identity, and Quarter Up made the right choice in preserving that identity instead of trying to impress with technology. What they built has artistic coherence, and in the context of fighting games, visual coherence and readability during combat are worth far more than the latest generation of shaders. Performance in a fighting game is a subject I take very seriously, perhaps more than anything else when evaluating a title in the genre. There's no discussion about system depth, combo routing, or mix-ups if the game doesn't run in a stable and consistent way. So when I jumped into the Invincible VS Alpha, my first concern wasn't the characters or the stages, it was the fluidity of the combat in the two most critical environments, local and online. Locally, the experience was very solid. The game ran locked at 60 frames per second without any noticeable drops, even in the most chaotic situations with 3 characters on screen, particle effects bursting in all directions, and overkills happening. For an alpha build, this already says a lot about how the team prioritized technical stability right from the start of development. Quarter Up knows that an unstable frame rate in a fighting game isn't an aesthetic inconvenience, it's literally a game-altering issue that breaks the timing of everything. The netcode, however, is where things got trickier to evaluate. In the alpha, I had online matches that ran beautifully with imperceptible delay and a feel very close to local play. And I had matches where the rollback manifested aggressively enough to make the combat completely unreadable. Now, this is almost expected in an alpha because the servers weren't at true launch capacity and the player base was smaller and more geographically dispersed. What worries me isn't having seen problems. It's the inconsistency between matches that swung from excellent to terrible without warning. One performance detail that bothered me in a way few have commented on was the perceived speed of neutral movement. The game has a sense of weight to its strikes that is intentional and works very well, but the ground mobility without using dash resources feels artificially slower than the overall pace of the combat demands. It's not a frame rate issue, it's a speed design choice that creates a strange dissonance for those coming from games like Marvel vs. Capcom or Dragon Ball FighterZ, where base movement is already agile enough to create constant pressure. Another technical point that drew attention was the lack of an option to skip intros and cutscenes during the alpha. In an online fighting game where you play dozens of matches in a tournament or a ranked session, having to watch the same entrance animation repeatedly is a quality of life issue that seems small but quickly builds up annoyance. It's the kind of detail that indicates certain parts of the interface were still in development, and I hope it's resolved in the April 9th open beta and the final release. What the developer specifically promises to improve online performance is the rollback netcode system, which they continued to refine between the alpha and the beta. They explicitly listed improving the stability of online matches as one of the main system implementations, which means they acknowledged the problem and worked on it. This is the kind of communication I want to see from a studio, owning up to what needs improving instead of ignoring community feedback. The open beta in April will be the real test of this, with a much larger player base and connections coming from all over the world. Ultimately, Invincible VS's performance leaves me with a wait-and-see attitude. Locally, the game is where it needs to be, and the solid frame rate is a foundation that can't be ignored. But online is where fighting games live or die in 2026. And the quality of the netcode at launch will determine whether this community grows or withers in the first few months. Skybound and QuarterUp have a month until April 30th to show that the alpha's problems were truly addressed. The open beta will tell us a lot about where this game is going to end up. I'll start with the question everyone really wants to know. Should you put your money down on the game on April 30th or wait? The honest answer is that it depends on who you are. And I'll be specific about this because playing the beta gave me enough clarity to separate the player profiles who will love this launch from those who should hold off. If you are a fan of the Invincible series, whether through Kirkman's comics, the Prime Video animation, or both, the answer is almost automatic. Buy it at launch. The game breathes the franchise's universe in a way few licensed games manage to do. Each character carries the personality you know, the stages have that visual weight from the show, and having 18 playable characters at launch, including Conquest, with Universa and Immortal DLCs already confirmed, means the content is there from day one. The creation of Elemental, a completely original character with the blessing of Robert Kirkman and Cory Walker, is exactly the kind of signal that shows this project respects the source material. If you are a casual fighting game player who wants to have fun with friends or simply play something different, Invincible VS was also made with you in mind. The auto combo system and accessible controls allow anyone who has never touched a fighting game to pull off flashy moves in minutes. This is the profile of a person who will boot up the game on a night in with friends and have a memorable session right away without needing to study frame data or memorize complicated command lists. Now, if you are a competitive fighting game player who lives in ranked and wants a game to play seriously for years, then I need to be honest. Wait a few months before deciding. The combat system has real depth, that was clear in the beta, but the competitive fighting game community has a track record of abandoning titles that fail to sustain the online player base after the initial hype. The issue of price and the post-launch content model also factors into the equation. They confirmed a year, one season pass with DLC characters, which is the standard market model these days, and a sign that they intend to support the game long term. But paying the base price plus a season pass at launch is a considerable investment without having certainty of long-term support. My recommendation for anyone on the fence between buying and waiting is to jump into the open beta from April 9 to 11 to test it out firsthand before deciding. And I'll speak for myself. I am buying it at launch without a doubt. Not because I think it's a perfect game, because it's not. There are still adjustments to be made to the netcode, transition animations, and some normal timings. I'll buy it because the mechanical foundation we played in the beta is solid enough to justify the price, because Quarter Up has a history of delivering, and because the combination of a strong IP with competent game design is too rare to ignore. It's the games you drop after a few months that you regret not having played at their peak. At the end of the day, Invincible VS is a recommended game for fans of the series who want to play as their favorite characters. For casual players who want an accessible and visually impactful fighting game, and for anyone who wants a 3 versus 3 tag fighter with more personality than what's available on the market right now. If you fit into any of these three groups, the April 30th launch justifies the investment. If you are a hardcore fighting game player who wants a guaranteed competitive scene for years, wait 3 months, see how the community shapes up, and then decide